They've stood at the front lines of law, leadership, and public service. From the courtroom to the classroom, Attorney Karen Jimeno brings sharp legal insight, academic excellence, and a voice that has guided national conversations. Attorney Mike Toledo, a seasoned public affairs strategist and legal mind with years in media, corporate leadership, and government reform. Together, they bring law to life with experience, integrity, and the courage to ask hard questions. Two minds shaped by the law. Two voices trusted in and out of the courtroom. This is Abugado.
Good evening. Welcome to Abugado, where legal minds clash and national issues come alive. I'm Attorney Mike Toledo.
And I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno. Tonight, we examine an issue that cuts deep into the core of our electoral system. A question of choice, qualification, consequence, and what best serves the voice of the people. Let's take a closer look.
In every election, the people decide. Their vote is their voice, their mandate. But what happens when the proclaimed winner is later disqualified? Should the second highest vote getter take the seat, even if voters didn't choose them? Despite the court's shift, the second placer rule lingers in some outcomes. Does this rule uphold electoral integrity or distort it? Tonight, we confront a legal contradiction at the core of our electoral system. Should the second placer rule apply when the winning candidate is later disqualified or deemed ineligible?
In favor of the continued application of the second placer rule is Attorney Alberto Agra, former Acting Justice Secretary, former Solicitor General, and a longtime election law professor at Ateneo Law School. He is the creator of the Election Law for All lecture series and a leading voice on public law and governance.
And you know what, partner, aside from those qualifications, he's also actually a well-known athlete, having led the obstacle course tournaments in the past. But maybe we'll talk about that.
Brains and brawn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, taking the opposing view is another well-respected legal mind, Attorney Luie Tito Guia, a former COMELEC Commissioner, a respected lecturer at the Toledo School of Law and De La Salle University, and an international legal consultant on democratic governance. He believes the second placer rule must be rejected to preserve electoral legitimacy.
Before we begin, let's walk you through how tonight's discussion will unfold.
We begin with the opening statements. First, the speaker supporting the proposition presents their position in a focused 2-minute statement. Then, the speaker challenging the proposition offers their perspective, also within 2 minutes. The conversation then unfolds through 2 key subtopics. For each subtopic, the guest supporting the proposition presents their insights for 2 minutes, followed by a 2-minute perspective from the guest challenging the proposition. After both perspectives have been presented, we move into the open exchange. A 6-minute free-flowing discussion where both guests ask questions, share points, and respond to each other directly. Once both subtopics have been explored, we proceed to closing reflections where each guest is given 2 minutes to summarize their key messages. And finally, the hosts step in with their own questions. In this 6-minute segment, the guests respond, clarify, and deepen the discussion, ensuring no critical point is left unexplored.
Now we begin with your opening statements. The question, should the second placer rule apply when the winning candidate is later disqualified or deemed ineligible? Attorney Al, you have 2 minutes.
Yes. First, thank you, Karen, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Kuya Luie. Actually, we're here not just to debate, but to learn. And this particular issue is not settled yet, although there's a Supreme Court decision already, but it's a 852 decision, so it might be reversed soon. So position, second placer rule should be retained. Why? Because actually there's no first placer. Because the first placer was not actually eligible to hold office. Because in this particular case, the first placer was not qualified for lacking one of the requirements for elective office, which is residency. So sa umpisa pa lang, hindi na siya kwalipikado. And therefore, lahat ng boto sa kanya should be erased, should be considered stray. And therefore, dun papasok yung second placer rule. The first placer was not eligible, was never a legitimate candidate in the first place, was never a candidate in the first place. And therefore, you take out his votes, you now have the quote-unquote second placer who's actually the first placer. So that's the whole reason for this. While the Supreme Court said that there is no law, basically the previous decisions on the matter was actually an interpretation of the Supreme Court in terms of various disqualification cases. No? Konting kwento lang history, when I was in law school, wala pa yung second placer rule. No? Then dumating ang second placer rule, now baka mabago muli. No? So again, for us teachers and for us students, this is very important because will this decision be applicable for the upcoming election? Unfortunately, when this decision was rendered, tapos na ang proclamation ng mga kandidato. Now, there's still pending disqualification cases or cancellation of certificates of candidacies. So ngayon, medyo nahihilo ang Commission on Election. What should they do with the pending cases, whether local or even national positions?
Okay, so Attorney Al will expound on that later, but the time's up for your opening statement. We'll have Attorney Guia for your opening statement.
Well, thank you for having me here. And of course, I'm here to learn as well. The decision, as Attorney Agra said, was an 8-5 decision in favor of going back. Going back, I say going back because that was the previous rule prior to 2012 in the case of Halos Hos versus COMELEC, at least by and large. And what is the logic of the decision of the Supreme Court? Number one, decision of the COMELEC came after the people have already voted, and therefore they have already expressed their preferences and their choice. Now, the logic of the Supreme Court decision says that, you know, if the people have already expressed their choice, would it be consistent with the concept of republicanism if you will nullify all those votes? And secondly, we have a system called a plurality system, meaning only those who obtain the highest number of votes would be declared elected. In other words, if you did not obtain the highest number of votes, then you did not get the mandate of the people. A second placer did not get the mandate of the people. So how can someone who was rejected by the people be made to occupy a post under a system which we call democracy?
Yeah. Well, very well said. Very concise. You still had 20 plus seconds left. But at least, I think, partner, very important here is to take a step back and explain to the audience, because from the start, I think the second placer rule was not explained clearly, but this is about the elections. If the person who won suddenly had a disqualification or some reason to nullify their proclamation, then the issue that they're debating upon here right now about with two election law experts is that whether the person who got the second highest number of votes should be considered the winner or should be proclaimed as the winner.
And that happened because of the Halos Hos case, Halos Hos versus COMELEC case, which adopted that rule.
Yeah, and now very timely, partner, because ang dami talagang mga na-nullify na proclamation from the 2025 elections. And of course, people are wondering, tama ba na yung second placer ay mailagay? So does declaring the second placer as the winner honor or distort the people's vote? Let's begin with Attorney Agra. 2 minutes.
Going back further, The case filed regarding, in this particular case of Abugado, is a case to cancel the certificate of candidacy because of what we call material misrepresentation. And when we talk about material misrepresentation, this talks about the qualification of the official.
In this case, it was domicile.
In case of domicile and residency.
Okay.
So dapat 1 year, naging 5 months lang. So the question is when Com mentioned about expressing your choice because it's a democracy. But one element of material misrepresentation is fooling the people, intending to defraud the people. Otherwise, the certificate of candidacy would not have been canceled. So how can a winner who fooled the people be declared the winner? So by fooling the people, then you dupe the people, you claim that you were qualified, but when you are not, so how can you represent the people if you fooled the people? So that's my point. So expressing the will of the people might not be accurate kasi niloko mo yung taong bayan eh. So bakit ka mananalo at magiging mayor kung at the very premise niloko mo ang taong bayan? Hindi yata yun ang demokrasya.
Well, thank you so much, Attorney Al. Concise as always. Now, Attorney Guia, your view on whether awarding the post to the second placer is consistent with democracy and with legal principles?
Well, first, in democracy, you don't just nullify people's vote on the assumption that they were fooled because they've already expressed their choice. And remember, misrepresentation is based on Section 78 of the Omnibus Election Code. And Section 78 of the Omnibus Election Code is a remedy that is supposed to be decided by COMELEC way before the election. The situation that is being presented now is a situation where COMELEC was not able to decide the case when it should have decided it before election. So bumoto na ang tao na dapat na desisyonan yon before pa at hindi na dapat sila kasama talaga. And in that respect, tama yun. If you have misrepresented, then you should not be voted on. But the problem here is at the time the voters expressed their choice, there was yet no formal declaration of a misrepresentation having been made. So the people made a choice on the basis of their preference. Okay? And of course, a decision which says that, a candidate misrepresented that came after, dumating pagkatapos ng pumili na yung kwan, tama ba na tatanggalin mo and assume that every vote given to the quote-unquote first placer was a product of a misrepresentation?
Well, attorneys, the floor is now open for an exchange. So whatever questions you have with each other, this is the time where you can clarify and have a discourse.
If I may, being the most
start.
senior, I'll use age. Regarding the no decision by the COMELEC, I think the facts of the case will tell us nagkaroon ng division decision canceling the certificate of candidacy before the election, which was affirmed by the COMELEC and bank, canceling the COC kasi niloko niya ang taong bayan, also before the election. Ang problema lang, in our system, the decisions of the NBank can be elevated to the Supreme Court. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court, and this is a 2022 case, decided April of 2025. So I don't think COMELEC is at fault here kasi there were decisions. And these decisions are known to the public, and therefore the public should have been cautioned na the one that they're electing fooled the people because there were two decisions already by the Commission on Elections. So again, very clear that there was material misrepresentation. Nagsinungaling siya sa kanyang certificate of candidacy on the material fact, on the qualification. He was not actually qualified and intend to defraud the people. So,
well, first and foremost, there's no question that he cannot occupy the office that because of his misrepresentation. The question is, who then should occupy the office?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the crux of the matter when we're
Okay,
discussing
because
this rule.
hindi siya dapat umupo.
Correct.
Malinaw yon, nag-misrepresent siya, nagsinungaling. Pero sino ang dapat umupo? Yung bang natalo? By legal fiction, kinonsider natin na panalo siya kasi sinabi natin na stray. No? And I don't think there is a legal basis for that. Because when you look at the decision, when you look at Section 6 of Republic Act 6646, which actually mentions a case to proceeding even beyond the conduct of election, means that, ang sabi doon is, pag hindi na desisyonan bago mag-eleksyon, magiging stray yung boto. Okay? Pero hindi siya malinaw kung na-desisyonan after, kung magiging stray nga yung boto. So, in-adapt lang, kumbaga, in-assume na magiging stray na rin yung boto ng mga tao na bumoto after election, when they voted already.
Yeah.
So, they've expressed their choice, and you just nullify it and say that the second placer was the one who obtained the highest number of votes.
Yeah, I see the point of Attorney Guia here because when it comes to, let's say, yung mga close fight, medyo acceptable pa siya. But I was in Davao for the elections coverage of Billionaire News Channel, and there were several positions there, including former President Duterte, where he won by a landslide. Like really, siguro yung number 2, wala pang 20% of the votes. So can you imagine that scenario? Let's say theoretically, if you have the second placer in that case who only received a very small amount of votes and then suddenly being declared the winner. So I think the question here is, okay, let's agree that in instances where this second placer rule applies, it's because the winner, the real winner, can't sit or be proclaimed. But what about the question who should rightfully take that place? Because as voters, diba, pag may mayor, ang expectation mo is kung hindi, or may mangyari sa kanya or hindi siya pwede, yung vice mayor yung uupo.
Correct. Agree. No? And that rule applicable for if you commit an election offense. No? I think yung issue is if you're not actually qualified, you were never a legitimate candidate, you fooled the people, and therefore any vote given you is not rightfully yours. So I think that's the basic premise. And therefore, technically, the second placer is not the second placer. So technically, the second placer is the first placer.
So parang sinasabi mo, void ab initio. Parang the concept
Correct.
of void ab initio.
Kasi you were never a legitimate candidate. You were never a candidate in the first place.
But
Unfortunately,
can we-
that decision, walang finality yung decision until after the proclamation.
Yeah.
So you void everything because you were, again, hindi ka lehitimong kandidato at the very beginning.
But that goes back to Attorney Guia's question that doesn't that nullify the will of the voters because hindi natin ma-predict kung paano sila bumoto kung wala yung first candidate. For all we know, baka napunta yun dun sa number 3 or number 4, right?
Correct. So again, wag magpaloko. And again, unfortunately, the people were fooled. And should we reward now that? Of course, no issue regarding the qualification. It's the issue of who should now replace him or her. Is it the second placer or you follow the rule on succession?
Which is provided for by the local government code,
Yes,
correct?
and unfortunately, that matter of abandoning the second placer is not in the decision of the COMELEC and bank. Pinasok lang ng Supreme Court. So, ang tanong, pwede bang gawin ng Supreme Court yun? Introducing new matters which is not. Kaya I understand the Commission on Election will seek for either a motion for reconsideration or to clarify the matter.
Well, in all probability, I wouldn't be surprised if the COMELEC would seek clarification and file a motion for recon because there seems to be really a great uncertainty as far as this matter is concerned. Now, partner, let's now move to precedent and or precedent and consistency. To both of you, of course. No? How has jurisprudence evolved on this issue? And what message do current rulings send? Perhaps, Attorney Al, I'll start with you.
Usually going to that issue. Yeah.
Again, when I was in law school, there was no such thing as second placer. Kasi how can, quote-unquote, a loser be a winner? No? Then, nagkaroon na ng second placer. Then, now back to the original doctrine wherein there's no second placer. So, that's the challenge. Again, the challenge is we just have finished our elections. What will COMELEC do with the existing cases? Because there are pending cases. So, again, issue of legitimacy. Whether you erase all his or her votes, then second placer becomes the first placer.
Very interesting. Attorney Guia, your thoughts on this specific subtopic?
Okay. Number one, if you take a voter's perspective on the matter, then candidates would have nothing to do with it. You do not reward nor punish candidate, but you uphold the will of the voter by counting what they have already expressed. So that's the whole point of democracy, of republicanism. You listen to the voice of the people, regardless of whether a particular candidate will be benefited or not. Now, the logic of abandoning, or the logic of abandoning the, not really abandoning, but of maintaining the succession rule, so to speak, is that the second placer is really a loser because the voters did not vote for him or for her. So why put someone in office, one who was rejected by the people? Under our plurality system, there's only one winner. The rest have been rejected.
Before
so
we
I
go
really
to our
get that point of
before we go
Attorney
to
Luie.
our next subtopic, siguro maganda rin tanungin natin sa kanila, no? Paano nga naman yung mga bumoto sa vice mayor para maging vice mayor, maging vice mayor, no? Paano naman 'yun? Hindi naman siya binoto para maging mayor.
Well, it
Binoto
goes with
siya
the
parang vice
councilor as
mayor.
well because pag
Correct.
umandar na yan at
Oo.
umakyat na siya as mayor,
Aakyat yung
naman
unang
yung number
councilor.
one
Oo,
councilor to be the vice mayor.
Paano 'yun? For both gentlemen.
Again, under the law, if you're elected as vice mayor, alam dapat ni vice mayor at alam din ng taong bayan na pag may mangyari kay mayor,
Siya yung magiging mayor.
by operation of law, he will succeed or she will succeed, like the vice president and the president. No? So that's part of his or her job description. Spare tire, if you may, but again, in so far as the vice mayor is concerned, he or she presides over the session of the council. So alam ng taong bayan, on the premise that alam ng taong bayan ng local government code, that merong rule tayo on and succession. And when you talk about national positions, then when there's a vacancy, then special election ang remedy.
Attorney Guia, I have a question on other positions that don't have that parang very clear rule of succession. So right now in Manila, one of the most contested results as well is the issue of Abante, former Congressman Abante, and Congressman Uy, who had already won, but then suddenly he's being proclaimed as, well, nullified yung proclamation niya supposedly on a citizenship issue. But for Congress, hindi clear kung sino dapat yung mag-succeed. Not as clear as mayor and vice mayor.
Hindi, walang succession sa representative dahil
Both Senate and Congress, no?
wala siya talaga. Okay. So parang magkakaroon ng vacancy.
Vacancy talaga for the
or
whole
there
term.
is a failure to elect. There's
So
no one
magkakaroon ng
elected.
special elections. Ganun ba?
There has to
ba
be an
yun?
election for that
Magkakaroon po ng
district
special
should be
election?
because walang nakaupo.
Okay, well, it's a good question to ask you as a former COMELEC Commissioner. Nangyari na po ba yan before na nagkaroon ng special
None
election?
that I can remember. Usually what happens is that when there's a vacancy, I mean the normal vacancy for the position of representative, kailangan i-declare formally yung vacancy ng House for that matter, and then they will communicate with COMELEC. wala pa ako maalala na may nangyaring ganun except for a few instances.
And if I may, nagkakaroon ng caretaker.
Yeah, I
Yun
was
ang
going to ask
ginagawa,
that.
caretaker.
Because may mga past na instances that yung mga members of Congress na nalagay sa cabinet positions, they vacate their congressional seat
Correct.
and then nagkakaroon sila ng caretaker. Can that apply?
Yes, in fact, lately lang, 'di ba, yung sa Baguio. Ang naging caretaker yung si Yap na taga Davao.
Yeah.
Kasi nga nawala yung nagkaroon ng vacancy sa position sa Baguio as representative of Baguio.
And the
Can
issue
that
there
happen
is,
here?
meron bang batas about caretakership? So that's another legal issue.
Wala ba? Walang
Wala
batas?
Wala
So
eh.
where did we get that caretaker position?
Filipinos are innovative.
No, because I find this interesting because Senator Ping Lacson also recently said that he will push
Correct.
for that designated survivor law.
Yes.
And marami na tayong successors pagka-president yung pinag-uusapan, but like, if you have a scenario similar to that TV series, then
Yes.
it can happen na biglang wala pala tayong batas for someone. So in this case, Attorney Guia, can you apply the custodian or caretaker rule if the congressional seat is vacated because the first most number of votes recipient was eventually disqualified?
Well, it would seem that that Congress would, go by the caretaker system, and they've done that. I mean, there's really no law, but I don't know. Probably Congress is sovereign.
Who gets to decide who will be the caretaker?
Well, whoever is powerful in Congress, I say.
Kasi minsan the speaker becomes the
speaker.
caretaker or the speaker assigns
Yeah.
or designates. So,
In the case of Baguio, I think it was the speaker then who assigned.
correct. And no one
Okay.
questions.
Yes.
So in that case, to a certain extent, if you're the voter, you also say, nullify pala yung choice ko. No? A very interesting topic.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, for now, we'll take a short break. Up next, final reflections from our guest. This is Abugado.
Welcome back. You are watching Abogado. We're taking on one of the most contested questions in election law today. Should the second placer rule apply when the winning candidate is disqualified or found ineligible? We have, of course, Attorney Alberto Agra, who believes the second placer rule preserves legal continuity and respects institutional processes, while Attorney Luie Tito Guia, who is former commissioner of the COMELEC, asserts that it distorts the will of the voters and must be abandoned. Now is the time for our guest closing reflections. Attorney Al, your final thoughts.
The fundamental premise of the second placer rule is the first placer was never qualified. And therefore, all the votes garnered by that first placer can be considered stray or deemed erased or deemed not cast. And therefore, being an illegitimate candidate was never a candidate in the first place. Therefore, all the votes are erased, and therefore, the remaining votes will be the votes for the second placer, quote unquote, who is effectively the first placer. That's the fundamental premise of the second placer rule, in quotations, because I'd like to say that the second placer is effectively the first placer. So it would have been different if the candidate was a legitimate candidate possessing all the qualifications and none of the disqualifications. But in this particular case, lack of residency is material, and therefore, will of the people versus one's qualification, you cannot, a person who's not eligible cannot hold office.
Thank you, Attorney Agra.
Thank you.
Attorney Guia, your closing statements. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, there is no question that one who does not have the eligibility for the office cannot occupy the office. One who is disqualified as a candidate cannot occupy the office. The question is, who should then occupy the office? Should it be the one who did not get the highest number of votes? Okay, it would not seem so. All right? It should be the one who the people chose as the rightful occupant to the office. And if there's a vacancy created because no one gets qualified, then it should be the one the people chose to succeed someone who fails to qualify.
And in case walang succession, then just leave it open, or you apply the rules that we have customarily applied.
Well,
like
no, the Constitution actually requires, my position is the Constitution requires the holding of a special election to fill the vacancy, because not a single constituency in the country should be left unrepresented.
That's as far as you talk about Congress or the Senate. But
Yes.
for the local government officials, we have the local government code, correct?
Yes.
And if I may, the vice mayor was not elected as mayor,
Yes.
while the second placer was elected as mayor.
Mayor. Yes.
So,
Yes.
The second placer was not elected as mayor because he's a second placer.
Yeah.
The vice
Actually-
mayor was elected to succeed the mayor.
but not elected as mayor.
But to succeed the mayor in
But not
case
elected
there's
as
no
mayor.
one
Yes.
is elected, because in this case no one is elected.
Yes.
Yeah. But I kind of get that kasi may mga ibang botante,
Yeah.
pag tinatanong ko minsan, sino iboboto mo? Si ganyan. But never si. Sasabihin nila isang
ganon.
candidate, why? Never yan. So they would rather go for another candidate, let's say hindi tumuloy yung isang kandidato nila. So to a certain extent, that's my reservation here when you say second placer gets it.
But just to be honest, I'm not as fully convinced of my own position here. It's just
Okay,
a good.
that's unique.
It's just a good way to converse.
Yes.
I mean,
To
taking
debate
the
on
both
it.
sides.
Yeah.
Well, actually, this is really a good topic for debate because
Correct.
even the Supreme Court, as Attorney Agra mentioned during his opening statement, is divided on this issue. That's why
Yes.
we have that 8-5.
852.
The two
did not participate.
abstain.
Over
So,
on leave.
And then, in fact, I think if I may, partner, no, I think the dissenting opinion of Marvic Leonen
Is
is quite strong.
Yes,
it's
in favor
quite
of the
strong.
second placer.
In favor of the second
As strong as the
placer.
position of the majority and Justice Kagiwa.
Exactly. So I think in all probability, sa tingin ko, partner, ang gagawin talaga dito ni COMELEC Chairman Garcia at ng COMELEC ay siguro talaga magfa-file sila ng motion for recon to clarify. Kasi it will be for the benefit of future elections and more importantly to the sovereign. Sovereignty resides in the people, all government authority emanates from them. Na kailangan talaga na malaman nila ano ba talaga? Ano ba ang sitwasyon pag merong na-declare ineligible or may na-disqualify? Paano sila papalitan?
I think we owe it to the people na malinaw.
Correct.
Yeah.
The rules should be clear. I think,
Well,
Yeah.
ako siguro part of my advocacy is that Section 78, which is the basis for the misrepresentation rule, was a law prior to the adoption of the 1987 Constitution. So we have a very antiquated election legal framework. It's time to update our election legal framework.
sorry,
Yeah.
and I share that. I'm pro-electoral reform.
It's about time, no?
It's about time. Hindi pa ako lawyer. We have the Omnibus Election Code. So it's about time.
So I have a question. Since we're
Yes,
now on the
partner,
stage of
yes,
final
yeah.
questions.
Final question from
so
you,
let's say that we do have someone from Congress interested to advocate for this electoral reform. What would either of you advocate for? Would you advocate for the second placer to be proclaimed if we were to turn this into a law and not just rely on the Supreme Court decision? Well, Attorney Agra and Attorney Guia, whoever wants to go first.
Magandang tanong niya kasi hindi nga ako kumbinsyado. No, but I think what needs to be done is for a law that would allow COMELEC to resolve cases prior to the elections.
Paano
Way
kung
before
kulang sa
election.
time?
Kaya nga dapat yung election adjudication legal framework should be designed in such a way that COMELEC will be able to
Must
resolve
decide
cases
before
right
elections.
away.
Yeah, I think that's key as well. But Attorney Agra, in terms of putting this into a law.
You know, I'm conflicted. I must admit that.
Yeah.
You're also conflicted?
Yes.
Okay.
There are merits to both
To both
positions.
arguments, yeah.
Very difficult if to take one particular side.
You remind me of a
regarding
girl
this
I
issue.
know. She's always conflicted. Anyway, you're saying,
I see,
does it remind you also?
Of you? No, again,
Okay.
the issue on second placer is just one of many issues. It has to be an electoral reform, overhaul. Cannot be piecemeal changing of provisions in the law. So that should be taken into account.
Ako naman, partner, ang question ko ito eh. Di ba meron tayong tinatawag na petition for quo warranto proceedings?
Correct.
Importante yun. At sabihin natin sa ating mga kababayan, taong bayan, quo warranto meaning really, you're questioning the holder of the office.
Correct.
To question, quo warranto in Latin is to question the authority, question your warrant. So paano ito mangyayari? Parang medyo nalilito ako ng konti, partner, no? Yung magpa-file ng quo warranto, kunyari, hindi naman siya yung uupo. Baka hindi siya yung uupo. So how will that now affect quo warranto proceedings, questioning the right of the person to hold that office? For both of you.
In the decision of the Supreme Court, it's clear. Even if it's for quo warranto, you follow the rule on succession.
Well,
With what does that mean? That
Hindi
you follow-
second placer.
ang dati naman pag quo warranto, talagang succession yan eh.
Correct.
Yung misrepresentation lang talaga ang inaanol mo kasi yung stray votes, and then the second placer becomes the first placer.
Again, what the Supreme Court did was to simplify the rules.
Yeah.
Regardless of the reason why you're ousted, for local officials, follow the succession. So, at least that's one thing good about that
Well,
decision.
as lawyers, I have a question. What insights do you have on why the Supreme Court has changed their decisions over time? Na nagpalit-palit.
It's hard to say kasi it's a very close decision. Even the domicile issue was a one.
It wasn't unanimous, no?
It was
Yeah.
6-7.
Parang barely.
7-6 lang.
Okay.
And the one is 8-5. So, you can't really say if there's something substantial that changed. Maybe, new justices having different perspective.
Okay. So that's why you said, Attorney Agra, earlier that we might see a change again in the future.
Yeah. And one of the reasons mentioned by the court was there was no law. So it's about time to have a clear
Probably.
law on the matter.
Very interesting. We'll see how this unfolds further.
Exactly.
But for you, partner, what was the issue that resonated with you the most?
Well, actually, there are really...
Partner, wag mo ako iwan.
Hindi kita iniwan. there are really strong arguments for it, no? But if you will ask me, I guess maybe medyo mas inclined ako dun sa dissent ni Marvic, no? Who was a batch below me in the College of Law.
Who was my professor in law school, yes.
So nabibisto tuloy ang aking edad, no? Yun lang, no? Yun ang sa tingin ko, partner. Yun ang nagre-resonate sa akin. Saka yung...
Which means you're in favor of giving it to the candidate that garnered the second highest number of votes.
Yes. That is my thinking. But again, it was not a clear. The justices were clearly divided as well, and magkakaroon nga ng filing ng motion for recall. Malalaman talaga natin. At alam naman natin, partner, ang mga desisyon ng Supreme Court nag-iiba, nag-a-adjust sila through time, depending on the circumstances, depending on the petitioners. What was clear then becomes something different, maybe a decade or 20 years from now. So, tignan natin.
Yeah, but this is going to be so relevant because
Correct.
there are several candidates right now that are
Yes.
already proclaimed or waiting to be proclaimed, even if they just received the second number highest of votes. But me personally, I tend to agree with Attorney Guia here that the person who got the most number of votes is the winner or chosen by the people under our democratic system. But the person who got the second number highest of votes lost and was not the choice of the people. So whatever rule we have in place for succession, I think is more acceptable because we do know that they have the mandate of the people for the positions that they're holding. And alam mo, nagiging talagang pronounced yan
Yeah.
yung lack of mandate pag malayo yung lamang.
Yes.
Nung panalo nung number one at let's say talagang kulelat yung number two. Mahirap siguro tanggapin for the constituents.
And there are no losers in Philippine elections.
Of
That's
course.
true. Marami lang nadaya.
Cheated. Pero one last point lang, kaya partner, no, kasi ngayon naman, di ba, wala namang TRO na final. Tama ba? Wala ba? No? Wala namang final decision pa ang Supreme Court. So, pwede bang sabihin na yung nanalong mga kandidato ngayon, pwede na sila i-proclaim?
COMELEC has proclaimed.
Exactly. COMELEC has started proclaiming.
So, nagpo-proclaim na sila.
Yeah. Kaya nga, that's the concern. Can COMELEC proclaim at this point?
Correct.
And they have in a number of cases.
Okay.
Yeah, they already have. But pagka natalo sila sa MR, paano yun, Commissioner Guia? Pag na-proclaim na ng COMELEC and then eventually COMELEC's motion for reconsideration is denied, therefore the Supreme Court's decision that says na hindi yung second placer ang winner, anong mangyayari dun sa pre-claim ng COMELEC ng mga second placers?
Sa akin kasi, status ko, na-proclaim sila, nag-occupy na ng office. So baka may co-warranto
na yun. Kaya nga, tinanong...
So magkaka-co-warranto naman.
Kaya tinanong ko nga earlier, paano yun? How will it
Pag
affect
wala ba
co-warranto?
nag-file ng
Angat sila sa Supreme Court.
co-warranto?
And get a TRO.
So pag wala nag-file ng co-warranto, pwede yung second placer is able to just
Kasi
occupy the
prinoklama na
office?
siya ng COMELEC. He's already, the proclamation is valid, at least at that point.
Or papasuspend mo yung effects of the proclamation.
Proclamation.
So it's up to the, I suppose, the
Lahat up to
losing
the Supreme
and the person who was disqualified.
Pero alam mo, partner, correct me if I'm wrong, ha? Pag na-proclaim, mahirap nang habulin. Di ba? Medyo mahirap-hirap na. Being
Or
an election
medyo
lawyer.
matagal.
Matagal.
Unless ikaw ang kunin na election lawyer.
Hindi naman.
Di ba?
May advertising pala
May
dito.
advertising dito.
But tama ka dyan.
Magkaiba
Mahirap
yun, no?
pabulin in a sense that
Correct.
kaya mong manalo, but sometimes with the speed,
Yes.
patapos na yung term.
Oo. Without mentioning his name, a dear friend of mine, ganun po ang nangyari. Nag-question siya. Then, the COMELEC reversed. Siya ang pinoclaim. But sadly, he only sat as congressman for 1 day.
Correct.
But at least meron siyang vindication.
Bata-bata pa tayo niyan.
Bata-bata pa tayo nun.
Hindi, nakakapagtaka. I've been observing election adjudication in other countries. I've done studies. And they're able to resolve presidential election, post-election controversy in 2 months.
Sa atin
Dito
po,
hindi.
ano ang average speed?
Nakwento nyo na. Medyo up to, siguro 1 day na lang o 2 days na lang bago matapos.
Yeah, but Commissioner Guia, since you came from the COMELEC, what is the stumbling block? Bakit matagal ang decisions ng COMELEC prior to the election para maiwasan na ganitong issue?
I think it's the legal framework, it's the tradition by which we have been used to in adjudicating election cases. Because in other country, iba yung perspective pag nag-adjudicate ka ng election disputes, expedited, and siguro masyado tayong concerned sa due process. I'm not saying that you throw away due process, but we liken election litigation to civil and criminal litigation.
Ang hahaba rin ng periods to file. Actually, maikli na nga for COMELEC because I've handled some election law cases. Maikli na nga yun sa COMELEC, but I guess you can make it shorter.
Yes.
Akala ko sasabihin ni Com ang may kasalanan yung abogado.
Yung abogado ng mga kasi they can bill per hour.
Yeah, exactly. By the word, by the minute. Well, again, thank you so much, Attorney Al Agra and Attorney Luie Tito Guia, former Commissioner, for lending your insights on this very vital and important issue.
At Abugado, we foster respectful discourse that informs the electorate and illuminates how legal questions shape the way we live, vote, and govern.
But before anything else, partner, gusto ko lang sabihin, congratulations to my partner. Isa po siyang Asian or icon for legal and media. Kaya po, isang karangalan na partner ko siya dito kasi by the process of osmosis, makamahawa po ako sa kagalingan.
Siya na ang next awardee. But thank you so much, my partner, Attorney
Mike. We're so proud of you. And if I may, partner,
I was gonna add, I wanna greet your son, Javi. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Javi.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, son. Be a good boy always, okay? Like that.
Akala ko like mom.
Sorry.
Attorney Al.
So, partner,
This is Abugado. Good night.